one of the things about trust is that data, and this is more of a private company things where a lot of the data we feel is only relevant to the person who is in charge of the data. Let me give you an example in terms of when you're talking about sales teams, they need to know more information about the company. They need to know how the company is doing from a financial point of view, from a subscription point of view, and all of those data. So earlier in some of the companies I've worked in, we would always be told the sales team needs to know only this, the marketing team needs to know only this, and that's it. Um, when I used to interact with Todd earlier, what I would be amazed at is the amount of information he's sort of sharing, and some of it is may not be relevant to me. Some of the information may not be that relevant to me in my day-to-day job, but it's good to know. It's good to know how a company is doing, what are the other aspects of the company which are changing, not changing. And I felt that that information led me to believe that I'm part of a larger thing.
Welcome to How I Made It in Marketing from Marketing Sherpa. We scour pitches from hundreds of creative leaders and uncover specific examples, not just trending ideas or buzzword-laden schmaltz, real-world examples to help you transform yourself as a marketer. Now, here's your host, the Senior Director of Content and Marketing at Marketing Sherpa, Daniel Burstein, to tell you about today's guest.
Nelson Mandela famously said, "It always seems impossible until it's done." There may be an idea you have right now that everyone doubts, even you. Can't possibly work. But here's some encouragement to give it a chance from my next guest. One of the key lessons from his career has been ask or you'll never know. Joining me now to share the story behind that lesson, along with many more lesson-filled stories, is Sagnik Roy, Senior Vice President of Times Internet. Thanks for joining me, Sagnik.
Good to be here, Daniel.
So let me tell people about your background real quick so they know who I'm talking about. Sagnik actually started his career as a senior tax consultant at Arthur Andersen. Then fortunately, he moved into our industry. He was a marketing and sales manager for Sony. He had some other roles, but he originally joined Times Internet 15 years ago as VP of Sales and Marketing for its Willow TV International, the first 24/7 TV channel in the U.S. dedicated to cricket. Times Internet has 571 million monthly users and a U.S. audience of 5 million. It's owned by the Times Group, publisher of the Economic Times, as well as the Times of India, which is the largest English language newspaper by circulation in the world. The Times Group is a private company and claims revenue exceeding $1 billion a year. Sagnik himself manages a team of 15 to 20 people across 3 customer-facing brands. So Sagnik, give me a sense. What is your day like as Senior Vice President?
Sure. Again, good to be here, Daniel. So typically my day starts with a lot of reading. So I typically dedicate about an hour just before my day starts. And because I work in the West Coast and a lot of my teams spread across over the world, most of my team is already up and running and I've got emails in my inbox. But I take about half an hour, 45 minutes to just sort of take a pause, read up a little bit, what's going on in the world, read a few emails, and then typically my day starts. Because I work remote and there are multiple people, most of it turns to be meetings and calls, just getting updates from teams, getting sales updates, marketing updates, and things like that. And then it sort of floats into a few things which I sort of work on because as the head of sales and marketing, I'm also responsible a bit for sort of strategic parts of the companies. So I take a little bit of time to see some of our projects, how they're going. Do I need to fix things? So part of it is, and I'll probably 60-70% of it goes into sort of talking to my teams across. And then about 25-30% is more internally figuring out how the company is working and strategic stuff, things like that. Yeah.
I love that you start with reading because I start with reading too. Now, personally, I want to ask you read just because I am a print guy where before I get on a machine, I want to read a little bit of print. And so this morning, for example, for me, that was the Wall Street Journal. Are you a print or digital guy or does it just not matter to you?
It just is like sort of, I look into my apps, I look into my news, but I'm most interested obviously in news about media, marketing, and things like that. So those things interest me a lot. So there are typical sort of websites or a couple of podcasts which I listen to in the morning, and I'm sort of going to get a quick line of what's happening. So yeah, mostly media and marketing, but yes, other news also float up. I just want to be a little more informed when I go out there to start the day running.
That's right. Start with information. I love it. And one thing mentioned, the side mention was podcast. So feel free, everyone, start your day with How I Made It Marketing and a cup of coffee,
Absolutely.
maybe. All right. Well, let's take a look at some of the lessons from some of the things you made in your careers. I've said before, I've never really been in another industry. I've never been a podiatrist or an actuary or something, but in marketing, we make things. And that makes it fun. So I mentioned this first lesson. I love this. Ask or you'll never know. And I love the story behind this. Tell us a story behind this lesson.
Sure. So this is, early in my days, I was working at News Corp as part of their international television division, which was called Star TV. And what happened was we had newly launched in a platform. And the caveat with launching on that platform was that you have to bundle and launch with your biggest competitor at that time. So it was a very awkward situation because we wanted this bundle to grow. We wanted people to know about this bundle so they subscribe to it and watch our content. But that meant spending marketing dollars and also promoting my competitor. And everyone was like, how does that work? I mean, every time we add $1 to my subscription, that guy gets $1 too, just for free. So we were like, okay, let's try and see. Let's go and approach them. And I know it's going to be a hard no, but hey, what's the worst which can happen? I always go with that philosophy. So we actually went and approached them, and they were like, "Are you guys serious? I mean, you want us to promote a combined package?" I'm like, "Look, this is what I feel. When we grow, you guys grow because it's a newly created bundle, right? So think about it and let us know." So they actually took it back to the management, and funnily enough, they got a yes. So when the marketing manager on the other side actually came back to me, he said, "You know what? I had no idea they're going to say yes, but they said yes, so we better start working on it now." So it stems from a little bit of fact that hey, we took it out there, we gave it a shot. If it had not worked, we would have probably spent all the marketing dollars to promote it. But the fact that it actually got a yes from the other side was amazing. And we actually worked together. We created our marketing calendar, we created a marketing profile, we did a campaign, and it worked very well for us, for both of us. And honestly speaking, it became a case study for both our companies for years when they kept on using this as a platform or as a framework of how you can work together and collaborate, and each can sort of get their own things out of this kind of campaign.
All right, let me ask, what was your biggest lesson you learned from having to do that collaboration? Because when we talk about collaboration and partnerships, so collaborations and partnerships are very hard when it's not your direct competitor, right? When it is, it's even harder. But one thing that I really love what you did, I just did a webinar a few weeks ago with SCORE, it's a small business group, about outsmarting your competition, talking about that. And I opened with the slide. There's a very famous quote. It's not enough that we win, everyone else must lose, right? And this is the Larry Ellison, Genghis Khan, very famous quote. And I feel the opposite because your competitors, those are the closest people to you in a way. They're going through the same things as you, right? What I always think, what can I learn from them? And a great example I like to give, which is kind of a physical example of what you talked about, is the Diamond District in New York City. And there's other examples from this, right? But all these diamond competitors, they said, let's all be very close together, right? Which would seem like a bad idea, but it's, hey, we'll get all the customers there. Everyone will get a share. We'll work together. But again, let's get back to, I've talked to many marketers about many collabs. Even when you're not doing a collab with a competitor, partnerships are so hard. It's hard within an organization. You're going to cross organizations. What is the biggest lesson you learned from collaborating with a competitor?
It's two things. One is definitely the first time I keep talking about that you got to be open to ideas, and it's very important. And the second thing, and I always believe this because we work in a space which is slightly nicher than the mainstream space. Out there, you got to build relationships which are for the long term. So outside of the work on 95, where we're literally killing each other with all of the stuff, I think the second aspect of it is that you got to maintain some sort of a bonhomie among your professionals, even though you're working with different companies, because you never know where and when these things will help. Luckily, the team at the competition and the team, we've sat together for drinks in conferences and things like that. And when you're approaching, they're like, okay, this is not a guy who's just come out from left field. We know the guy, we trust the guy. So I think two things. I always feel that every relationship, every meeting, always take something out of it because you never know where it will help. And that's the biggest thing about collab, that the guy on the other side looks at you and says, hey, I trust this guy, I know this guy, I've met him a couple of times. Let's see what he has to say.
No, I love that. The word too, bon homme, I might be saying it wrong, but that is such a beautiful explanation of it. And to do that, it takes some soft skills. And you talked about one of your key lessons too is prioritize soft skills when hiring. So kind of tell us how you learned that lesson.
Sure. So I always, in our field, especially in a multicultural field, you need people with very niche skills. You need be able to sell properties, media properties to a very niche diaspora audience. And for that, you need specific language skills and things like that. And it's not always you find such people. I mean, there are, of course, but very, very few. So, I've always had to hire people who necessarily don't come from the same sales or don't have that level of experience which one needs. So, what I tend to use is things like other factors when I'm looking at a person, right? What are the usual human skills, as I call it? Like, what are your day-to-day skills as a person? Who are you as a person? And I think that's fundamental to me when I sit across a person and I'm trying to get this person to be part of my team, right? So I always feel that things like, hey, are you being honest in your resume? Are you being very frank, and are you really in a place where you're willing to learn, you're willing to be that person where it's fine to be to have less experience, but are you hungry enough? Are you collaborative in a person? When I'm talking to you, do you sound like you are a person who doesn't know a few things but are willing to take that lesson and learn a few things? Because I've seen people say the moment you ask a question, they already have an answer 50% of the time. And I'm like, hold on, you don't even know what I'm asking, A. And B, how could you know everything about everybody? Right? So sometimes, and I understand it's sometimes the eagerness, you're young, you're like, I have to make my best impression. Well, don't make your best impression. Just show the person who you are, is what I feel. And those are the people I really sort of, attracts me as a team member, as a colleague, or even as a mentor at times.
That is, just such a good life lesson. I was so guilty of that, and I had a friend. Me and him went to high school together. We were in something called IB, International Baccalaureate. So it's a little advanced, and he's like a cardiologist now. And he called me out once, and he's like, because you were an IB kid in high school, you feel like you need to know everything about everything, and you always have to jump up with an answer. I'm like, shoot, I do that. And it's a good. Once someone calls it out, you're like, you know what? To your point, I need to step back.
Yeah.
But let me ask you about that specifically, because there'll be people that will hear that and they'll kind of nod, but they'll still be like, well, I need this and I need that, like these hard skills. So can you provide a specific example of how honesty and eagerness manifested in your team's operations or interactions with clients, right? Because for example, when I hear you talking about this, I interviewed Tomer Zucker, VP of marketing at DID. And one of his lessons on how I made it marketing was look past the CV. And he told the story of when he was working in sales at Microsoft. Fortunately, someone looked past the CV and they pulled him into marketing. That's how he got here, taking that chance, right? So I think we all kind of, people will be listening and they'll nod, but then they'll do the next interview and maybe they don't want to take that chance just because someone's honest or eager. So do you have any like specific examples of how that focus on honesty or eagerness helped your team in an interaction with a client or partner or something like that?
Absolutely. So, one of the first person I've hired in my team, and the salesperson didn't come from a sales background. And, they would be very nervous. And I remember I'm a bit of a macro manager. And I always say that just go there, talk to the client. I'm not going to be with you, but I'm sure you'll do well. That's sort of my mantra. And people get super nervous when they're like, oh my God, this is a client. If I mess up, if I do something wrong, I am going to get it. And I'm like, I have your back. Do not worry. So one of the things I remember, this person going up to a client, had a client meeting, and then called me back saying, it was terrible. I think I messed up big time. I am so sorry and all that. I'm like, it's okay. Don't worry about it. Let's hear back from the client. And the client call back and say, hey, we love hearing about your company. It was good. We want to talk back and more and more. And obviously the person didn't know that because the client gave me direct feedback. And so, I went back and I said, look, it's all right. I mean, this is what happened. And she was astonished. She was like, are you sure it was terrible? I said, it felt terrible because you literally went into that meeting thinking of fear, right? And I keep saying that do not have any fear. When I'm sending you out there for a meeting, I trust you 100%. And it's okay to make multiple mistakes, and it's okay to say things which you do not know. The best part of it is be honest. If you do not know something, say, I'll get back to you. I'll check with the team and get back to you. And she said that like multiple times. So she felt that that was the wrong thing to do. And that's not the case, right? So I think it's a fear. It's if you I always tell my teams, even younger team members, that have no fear. I'm sending you out there because I trust you. Do not ever think that any mistake you make will be a repercussion for you. It won't. This is the reason I'm sending you, is because you learn. I always say you learn from your own learnings, not from somebody else's learnings. And that's how I also learn most of the time.
That's true. And what you were saying there ties really into your next lesson. We talk about, okay, the customer asks you something, don't jump in and give the answer necessarily. You said, listen first, sell second. And this is something you learned earlier in your career in sales,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm. So that was something, again, coming back to the listen from your own learnings. And I remember I was this eager salesperson. This is back in when I was working for Sony, and my first, second sort of sales shift. And I would go in there and I would put in the documents. Here is what my company can do. This is what we can do for you. This is what we are as a company and all that. And I felt, and this is reverse of what the other person felt in my previous example, I felt I did amazingly well. I spoke for 45 minutes, great presentation. And I turned back and, feedback wasn't that great. Client didn't say much. There was not enough feedback. And this would happen 2, 3, 4 times. And then I'm like, something is off here. Something went wrong. So I actually went up to my boss and say, I think I'm doing something wrong, because I'm not getting enough clients feedback. I'm not getting enough business. And I think my boss told me that, hey, tell me what you're doing. And then this is when he was like, probably you need to step back a little bit and let the client talk. And I'm like, okay, let me try that first. So I think I went into next meetings probably talking a little less, trying to get more feedback from the client, trying to make this a conversation rather than a sales pitch, because you get a sales pitch literally every day in your life at every point. And if you can see, if you get multiple people talking to you, telling the same thing over and over again, you start becoming immune. The ones which interest you, the ones where you talk more than the other person. I always seen this, and I've seen this till date. And I tell clients also this at times when we're having a free-wheeling conversation. That you speak way more than I didn't even get a word in there. It's like, look, I felt like I could talk to you and I could say things, and these are the problems I need fixing. Can you fix this? And then I'm like, yeah, sure. This is what my platform can do for you, and that's about it. And this also leads to the fact that there are certain times when business doesn't convert immediately. I probably have not met the clients for next 2, 3 years, but when the client needs me, he remembers that, okay, this is one guy I can pick up the phone and talk to, and maybe he can help me, rather than, oh my god, I don't want to talk to this guy, he's going to again talk for 45 minutes nonstop. And that's what I don't want. Yeah, so that's what I thought helped.
So that's a great lesson from a one-on-one sales conversation. Have you been able to do anything with that in your career, in your overall marketing to, a broader audience? Because go ahead.
Yeah. No, absolutely. So I think, this part, the sort of listen and hear, it, I think applies to everywhere. When I'm having conversations with my colleagues, with other business leaders in the sales teams, other divisions and things like that, it's always, I feel, the fact that you got to be a patient listener. And I think it helps in all facets of life, even outside of work, where even listening for a small period to everybody who's sort of talking to you gives the person, first of all, the confidence that you are understanding what the person's saying, and the fact that you're empathetic to what they're saying. I think these are the two things which sort of work together. And as a salesperson over the last 10, 15 years, you've had multiple conversations with multiple people. So as in you, when you step into that mature sort of role in your life, I feel every conversation you have sort of puts you in that tone where, let me hear you out first, and then let me add in where I can.
Yeah. So I agree with that, especially anyone who's married or has any sort of intimate relationship.
Oh my God.
That is also very good advice there.
Yes. The longer you stay married, the longer you learn.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, but let me ask you this. But have you been able to, so that's in a one-to-one conversation. Have you been able to do this in a one-to-many conversation? And I ask this because when we think of marketing, I think sometimes we get too focused on an automation platform or data analytics or attribution or all of these very technical things. And we forget that what marketing is essentially is going to a mass group of people, even if it's niche, it's a bigger than one group of person, like we would in a one-to-one interaction. And one of the things I've seen, so we do coaching to businesses, it's part of the AI Guild, and often where there should be this kind of longer relationship, like you would with a marriage or anything, right? A longer relationship of back and forth.
Absolutely.
Right away are trying to sell something, right?
Absolutely.
Versus having a customer first objective, giving to the customer, giving value, and also hearing from them and kind of understanding whatever. There could be forms. There could be many ways of doing this, even in A/B testing or analytics, and then guiding them to the right place for them if that is purchasing from your company. So now you're in charge of not just sales, but sales and marketing. So have you been able to take this lesson of listen first, sell second, and put it into any of your marketing, any of your more mass communications?
Sure. So the way I look at marketing is, I always feel that be aware that the customer is intelligent, right? Don't presume that, you need to sort of barrage them with a lot of buzzwords. We are the best. We are number one. We are this, we are that. They know who you are. Don't Let's not get into those things, the top 5 things you will learn from Times of India. I feel that it's more of giving them pertinent data. So things which sort of help them in deciding, things which are more specific to what they're looking at. You're talking to a car company or you're talking to any data which is specific to their needs, right? And this is how you can help them. I remember this conversation and you bring this up. An astrologer a long time back would ask me, how do I create an ad where I can differentiate myself from other astrologers? Because every astrologer is going and claiming that I can solve your problem in 7 days. So I said, here is what you do. You should say, hey, I'm not sure I can solve your problem. I can try and help you make your life better, right? So that's what cut him into a niche, and he's probably one of our top performing clients right now. But yeah, I always feel that don't say things which are obvious and which everybody else is sort of constantly going and barraging you with. Make it a little more interactive. So that is like a little more, I'll try and help you. And that's, I feel, comes from the fact that I'll listen to you rather than let me tell you what to do here and let me tell you why you need to buy me.
Yeah, exactly. That's great. Well, in just a moment, we're going to talk about some lessons that Sagnik learned from some of the people he collaborated with. That's what we do as marketers. As I said, we make things, but we get to make them with people. But before we get to the second half of the episode, I should mention that the How I Made It in Marketing podcast is underwritten by MECLabs AI, the parent company of Marketing Sherpa. You can get conversion-focused training from the lab that helped pioneer the conversion industry in our AI Guild. Grab your free 3-month scholarship to the AI Guild at join.meclabsai.com. That's join.meclabsai.com. All right, let's talk about some lessons you learned from some of the people you collaborated with. You said you learned to lead with latitude. You learned this from David Wisnia, the EVP of Star TV Networks. How did you learn this from David?
Sure. And this is, one of my first jobs at a large company. And I remember when I walked into Fox, and this is part of the Star TV network, I really felt intimidated. And in my previous jobs, I used to have managers who would sort of tell me, okay, do this way, do it that way, make sure this doesn't look like this, and a bit of a micromanaging tendency. And as I was growing from being a sort of an executive to a managerial level, I would think that this is probably the way of good leadership or better leadership. David approached things very differently, and this is also a lesson which I have implemented all the time in my sales team. He would just say, "Hey, this is the job at hand. You go ahead and do it, and I'll make sure you have all the tools to do the job. But I don't want you to go out there and at every step of the way start asking me how to do it. What do I do? Am I doing things wrong?" He gave me a little bit of confidence, and I feel that that confidence led me to do a lot of things on my own without bothering about, is somebody overlooking my shoulder, is somebody telling me what to do. And I feel that aspect gave me confidence, gave him confidence in me. And by the by, when I go and now talk to my teams, it's the same sort of confidence I install in them, saying, hey, I know you know how to do your job. Here's what you need to do. Here are the tools I'm giving you to do your job. Go ahead and do it, and don't worry, I have your back. So that's a key aspect I learned from very early, and it really helped me to be the person I am. And definitely, I feel that has yielded positive results.
So how do you balance that with accountability? How do you hold your team accountable? Because I love what you said. I heard you earlier when you were telling one of the stories, use that word macro managing, which is so great, right? Better than micromanaging. But I feel like, why do managers or executives micromanage? Because they're worried that things not going to get done. They're not going to hit results. They're not going to do the thing right, right?
Right.
So how do you balance that macro managing with, okay, making sure there's some clear accountability and we're still hitting the goals we need to hit?
Right. So, in every company, there are certain processes which are already inbuilt in terms of how you have accountability. You have a weekly meeting, people give you updates and things like that. And that's there in the process system. What I believe in micromanaging happens when you're literally sort of following up on every hour, every day, everything. And I feel that when you hire a person, it's that first trust is there, that I have hired you because I trust you, because I believe you can do the job I have hired you to do. And I think that's already established. Now, if you are going against that grain and saying, okay, I hired you, I am going to make you do the job, but now I want to make sure you're going to do the job, and I'm going to call you every day, and I'm going to sit on your shoulder every day and make you do the job. That I feel is little counterintuitive to why you have that person in the first place. Because if you can do the job, then you would have done that person's job and your job as well. So that's where I feel a balance is. You have to trust their ability, and yes, they will make mistakes. There are places or the cases where they're not accountable. You don't need to call them out in a fashion where it feels that they've done something wrong. You go and say, hey, make sure you do this right. You didn't do this on time, but going forward, please make sure you do that. And I think 90% of the cases that typically works.
Let me ask about with vendors. Do you take the same approach with vendors? Because hearing what you said, I know there's so many vendors I've heard who this client hired me for this, and then they didn't let me do it, and they didn't trust me to do it.
I know. Yes, I do. I mean, we do have work with a lot of vendors. We work with our agencies. We work with PR agencies, marketing agencies in some cases. I think the approach is the same. I wouldn't change my approach for either in-house or out-house. It's just the same approach I have for everybody. If that's not the vendor who has accountable for what you've done to the job, you need to change them. And I'm very clear on that. I mean, that's simple as that. And ultimately, what happens, you find that fit. It's always that fit where the person understands what you need, when you need things by, and it works along. So I feel trust and accountability is a hallmark or is a feature of every relationship, whether it's work or at home. And if you don't have that in the beginning, you will never have that at any stage of a career. And if you put those sort of marks at the beginning, say, hey, I trust you and I know you can do your job, in most cases, they will learn that trust leads to something.
Well, let's talk about trust and how to win that trust to begin with. You said you learned that precision builds trust, and you learned this from Rosemary Gong, an account director at DAE Advertising. How did you learn this originally?
Right, and precision, actually, this is a key word because, again, this day and age, you convey everything over. I'm glad we're speaking on a podcast, but mostly everything goes through emails, texts, every communication. And she was a writer, and I remember she looked at my first email a couple of times and said, "What are you trying to say?" And I said something completely different from what I'd written. So she's like, "Hold on, why would just try and take a deep breath, write this again for me?" And I'm like, "What is this? Am I going through an English class here, or am I doing my job?" And a couple of times I would get slightly irritated. But what I learned from her is that when I actually wrote the email in the way she told me to do, it sounded better to myself. I'm like, wow, that sounds like a great email. That's what I wanted to say. And by and by, she started correcting things and all that. And then I started learning how to write something where I'm conveying the right thing. Because in this day and age, when you're talking to hundreds of people, most of the people you don't quite get to have a conversation with. But it's important to make sure that in your first or second email, you're conveying the right thing as closely as possible. This also helps when we are having difficult conversations over an email. You have to be nice and empathetic, but you have to put your point across forcibly. I've seen people write emails without pausing, and I'm like, you probably didn't mean that. And he said, I actually, I didn't. But then I'm like, okay, then you could have just written it a little differently, and this could have been better placed. So I think the art of precision is the art of conveying things to the extent you can in a proper manner is something I really learned from it, and that's something I've been told till date that my emails are way better constructed than what people have seen generally. And full credit to her that she really shaped the way I have communicated going forward.
I love that. And as a writer, that's such a key thing in writing. So there's a great writing maxim, show, don't tell. I even was reading in Wall Street Journal like last week about how to write a good dating profile, which was so interesting. And it kind of said the same thing. It's like good writing is precise. Like it's specific. And that's, you look at what we do in Marketing Sherpa. It's a key thing we tend to do. We'll get these pitches that filled with adjectives. I don't want to hear adjectives. To actually show it, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But so something we do on How I Made It Marketing here, as much as I agree with you on that, we always ask the flip side of it. All right, so let me ask you the flip side of that. So can you think of any times in your career, or are there any examples where precision is not the right approach? And let me give you one example of what I'm thinking.
Yes.
When I interviewed Kara Kemsky, the Vice President of Global Consumer and Vendor Marketing at the Not Worldwide on How I Made It Marketing, one of her lessons was hand grenade math is good enough. Don't change false precision. And so one of the things she talked about is when we get into the data and the numbers, right? When we're forecasting, we get so specific sometimes it's false precision. And she's like, it's a forecast. I wouldn't forecast that way, right? I'm not going to get down to 2 decimal points or whatever, because we know we don't know what's going to happen. We're kind of taking some guesswork. So I just wonder, is there any place in your career where you don't try to be precise?
Absolutely, there is, and there's a very important point you bring up. It's what we call death by analysis. It's like you go at it data, and you go at it at such an extent that everything outside sort of loses perspective. You're only looking at why has 5 not become 6 and 6 has not become 7. I always feel that data is great. Data is great, good to have. But when you're so focused on things like, hey, there is, you need to make numbers move from 5 to 6, 6 to 7, 7 to 8. But I feel that there's an overarching area there which basically talks about this is beyond data. There are certain other aspects which are qualitative in nature, and you need to bring those into the fore, not just looking at a target from A to B to B to C and C to D. And I always tell, whenever we have financial conversations with CFOs and things like that, they're like, hey, I'm only looking at the number and why is it not moved from A to B? And I'm like, just don't look at that. Look at other factors, market size, how the product is performing, what are the other things we need to look at, what are the strategies we need to put in for. It's not all about the numbers. So I always feel that don't look at a sheet just like a sheet. There are other things in there. Take the whole thing in perspective and then form your opinion on how a company is progressing or how a particular group is progressing. So yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. I love that term, grenade.
Yes. What does it all mean? I mean, and this is one of the things I kind of feel bad for people that work in the public companies, because this is one thing I've definitely seen when I worked at public companies and we're on some of those earnings calls, and there's just such a okay, when the CMO gets on with the analyst and it's like, well, it was 12.12%. Why was it not 12.14%? And I'm like,
Absolutely.
poor guy. All right, so we talked a lot about your management style, macro management, and trust. Another thing you learned is transparency is strength. And you said you learned this from Todd Myers, as CEO of Willow TV. How did you learn this from Todd?
Right, and this also has to do with the part of my macro managing and those kind of things. One of the things about trust is that data, and this is more of a private company things where a lot of the data we feel is only relevant to the person who is in charge of the data. Let me give you an example in terms of when you're talking about sales teams, they need to know more information about the company. They need to know how the company is doing from a financial point of view, from a subscription point of view, and all of those data. So earlier in some of the companies I've worked at, we would always be told the sales team needs to know only this, the marketing team needs to know only this, and that's it. When I used to interact with Todd earlier, what I would be amazed at is the amount of information he's sort of sharing, and some of it may not be relevant to me. Some of the information may not be that relevant to me in my day-to-day job, but it's good to know. It's good to know how a company is doing, what are the other aspects of the company which are changing, not changing. And I felt that information led me to believe that I'm part of a larger thing, not just one siloed department in a particular company, right? And that really helped me to sort of bond with my company as a person, and be that I'm part of the whole thing. I know about this, I know about that. And sometimes when you're having conversations with clients and vendors, these things help because you know so much of the company, you're adding different perspectives of the company which a client appreciates to just know about, and it just creates a good conversation. And I have sort of implemented in my when I'm talking to my team, I'm like, this is information which may not be relevant to you, and I start off with that, but this is good to know. So you guys should be just knowing that this happened in the company, this happened in the company, and that happened in the company. And most of the time it's taken positively because people don't want to have a conversation or a meeting just to say, hey, here's sales numbers. You didn't do this, you didn't do that, you didn't do this. No. First 15, 20 minutes, I always talk about this is what happening in company. this is a new thing which has happened. Maybe you want to know more about it. Here's the link. Read about it. Might help you. So that's what I feel is very important, and that's what I really learned from Todd. That be open to your team, give them all the information you need, and make them feel a part of a whole of a company and not just a really siloed teams.
No, I love you said it's about context. I remember one of the most powerful stories, I think it was in Time magazine. This reporter went to China to some of the vendors that were making the products for Apple. Mm-hmm. And there was this person that worked there 10 hours a day, 6 days a week, 7 days a week, whatever. And her only job was like to take this transistor and to glue it to this board or whatever. She didn't even know what she was making. And when the reporter showed her an iPad, she wept.
Oh my God.
Because she didn't realize this is what she was part of. This is what she was doing. Right. Wow. Your point. This is sometimes when we silo too much, it's like, well, you're not part of the bigger whole. You don't see the big picture. So let me ask you that. Is there any specific way you've ever used that data transparency to motivate your team to help their performance or something like that? Because, for example, I interviewed Kristen Stevens, a senior marketing manager for the U.S. at the Marine Stewardship Council, on How I Made It Marketing. One of her lessons was about the importance of a hero metric that you and your team work toward, right? It's all this, hey, we're all in for this, and they understand it. So is there any way you've used that data transparency specifically to help with team performance?
Pretty much every day. To be honest with you, again, my earlier roles, the information was so little that you would take that much information you have, and anything else the client would ask about a larger company, you had no idea, right? Because everybody knows everything about the company, there is no place where people don't know much about. It just makes for a larger conversation with everybody. People feel that they're not just a sales executive, they're a company executive. I use that word because you are just not part of one small thing. And I think, and to your point, and when we discussed about client interaction and let the client speak and you are having a conversation, you can't have a conversation with the client about a company unless you know a lot of things about the company. The client doesn't just want to hear what you did in your sales or what are the sales metrics of the company. They want to know, hey, what has the company done? And say, guess what? We did this 2 days ago. We did that a week ago. And they're like, wow, is the company's in onto this? Do they also do this stuff? Yeah. So that's the thing which I feel is great. And teams always appreciate when you give them updates over this company because it helps them to have better client conversations and convert sales. So I think there's a lesson in all of this, that the more you give to the team, the more they'll give back to you. And we want to give everything about the company in terms of information to the team so they can give back that much of input into our company as well.
We talked about a lot of different things it means to be a marketer, that honesty, that listening, that transparency. If you had to break it down, what are the key qualities of an effective marketer?
I think a couple of things I would say. One is the word empathy. I always feel that, in the end of the day, this is a people-led organization. It's a people-led media. Media is always people-led. You have to be able to listen and learn. And I think it's important that you're not operating in a silo. You're operating and you're doing well and you're seeing success because of the people around you. And we should never forget that. In your team, the people you work with, all of them contribute to the success which you as a leader get. So I also always remember to be hearing their side of things, understanding where they're working, and putting yourself on their place in times when they really are struggling with things. So I always feel empathy is a big important thing. The other thing is that you never remove your marketing cap, even if you're 9 to 6 job, right? So you're always, and some part of your brain is always sitting there and say, yeah, I saw something when I was driving past at 9 in the night. This is something I could probably apply back to my sales team. So I always feel that you should, at some point in time, it's a passion project. It's not a job where you've just taken it to get the paycheck. So when it's a passion industry, you should always be aware and always be switched on a slightly little bit. I don't know if you want to work 12 hours a day, 16 hours a day. That's not what I'm saying. But you should be switched on because that passion leads to, more knowledge and things which you will not sort of realize in your day-to-day work, which you can apply because you saw something, you heard something while you've been, around your life. So I feel those are the two important things.
No, I love that. I've rarely had my best ideas 9 to 5 in 4 walls, right? It's just kind of always keeping that brain open and those eyes open and those ears open.
Absolutely.
That's beautiful. Well, thank you so much for your time, Sagnik, telling us everything you learned with your campaign and careers. I learned a lot.
You're very welcome, and it's great to be here and talk to you.
And thanks to everyone for listening.
Thank you for joining us for How I Made It in Marketing with Daniel Burstein. Now that you've gotten inspiration for transforming yourself as a marketer, get some ideas for your next marketing campaign from Marketing Sherpa's extensive library of free case studies at marketingsherpa.com. That's marketingsherpa.com.